Samantha had it all. A thriving career in one of the top corporate firms in New York, a spacious apartment overlooking the city skyline, and a circle of friends who admired her for her success. Life was good. But it wasn't perfect. Samantha had always felt a little lonely, despite the perfect facade she had created. Relationships had always been fleeting, work was demanding, and the stress of maintaining her carefully crafted life was starting to wear her down. But then, everything changed when she met Mark. Mark was everything Samantha hadn't known she was missing. He was charming, attentive, and seemingly the perfect man for her. He had this gentle presence that made her feel safe, something she hadn't felt in a long time. They met at a party hosted by one of her colleagues, and from the moment they started talking, there was an undeniable connection. Mark was easy to talk to, always asking the right questions, listening intently, and offering the kind of warmth that made her feel like she was the only person in the room. At first, it was just casual dates, dinners, movies, walks through Central Park. But soon, the relationship deepened. They talked for hours into the night, shared personal stories, and found comfort in each other's company. Samantha, who had been so guarded before, felt herself opening up in ways she never thought possible. She allowed herself to feel vulnerable with Mark. He promised to protect her, to always be there for her, and she believed him. As the months went by, Samantha's trust in Mark grew stronger. He had this way of making everything seem so effortless, so natural. He was kind, always thinking of her, and would send flowers to her office or surprise her with little thoughtful gestures. It was like something out of a romantic movie. Samantha began to imagine a future with him, marriage, children, a life together. But life, as it often does, threw a curveball at Samantha. At just 33 years old, she was diagnosed with terminal cancer. The diagnosis came out of nowhere, shattering her world. One minute she was on top of her game, and the next, she was facing a grim reality. The doctors told her she had only a few months to live. The news was devastating. The walls she had built around herself over the years came crashing down in an instant. She felt powerless, terrified, and alone. Mark, however, was her constant. He promised that they would face this challenge together. "I'll never leave you, Samantha. We'll get through this," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he held her hand in the hospital room. The words were comforting, but they didn't erase the fear gnawing at her insides. Still, with Mark by her side, she tried to believe that there was a way forward. In the months that followed, Samantha's health deteriorated rapidly. But through it all, Mark stayed close. He became her caretaker, making sure she took her medication, helping her with day-to-day tasks, and providing emotional support during the most difficult moments. Every day, Mark was there, by her side, comforting her with the promise that everything would be okay. He never wavered. He was always calm, always reassuring. But as Samantha lay there, weak and fragile, a tiny, nagging feeling began to grow in the back of her mind. Despite everything Mark had done for her, something felt off. It wasn't anything she could put her finger on, just a sense of unease that lingered in her thoughts. She caught him checking his phone late at night, his face tense when he thought she wasn't looking. There were times when he would look at her with a strange, distant expression, like he was lost in thought. But when she asked him about it, he always smiled and reassured her that it was nothing. What really troubled Samantha, though, was the matter of her life insurance. Before she had met Mark, Samantha had taken out a policy worth millions of dollars, a safety net she had thought was necessary in case anything went wrong. The policy had always been something she never really thought about, until now. Mark was the sole beneficiary, and at the time, she had felt perfectly comfortable with that decision. After all, Mark was the person closest to her. She trusted him more than anyone. They had talked about it once, early in their relationship, before she had even been diagnosed. Mark had asked her about the policy in a casual conversation. "So, who's your beneficiary?" he'd asked, his voice light, like it was just a normal question. Samantha had told him without hesitation, "You. I trust you more than anyone, Mark. You're the one who'll take care of everything." He had smiled, that same reassuring smile that had won her heart. Now, as she lay in bed, struggling with the reality of her illness, Samantha began to think about that conversation more often. Mark had been so calm, so insistent that everything would be fine. He had even mentioned that the money from her insurance policy could help cover her medical expenses. But as time went on, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his reassurances than met the eye. What if he wasn't just trying to take care of her? What if there was something more he was after? Late one night, as she lay in the dark, her mind racing with these thoughts, Samantha decided to take a closer look at her insurance policy. She had always trusted Mark to handle all the details, but now, in the quiet of her room, something made her want to see the fine print for herself. As she flipped through the documents, her heart stopped when she saw the clause she had missed, the one that made it easier for Mark to claim the policy quickly in the event of her death. It wasn't just a safety net for her, it was a lifeline for him. A cold shiver ran down Samantha's spine. The pieces were starting to fall into place. She had always trusted Mark, believed he was the one person who would never hurt her. But now, for the first time, she wondered if she had been wrong. Was it possible that Mark had been waiting for her to die so he could collect the insurance money? Samantha didn't know what to think anymore. The person she had trusted the most in the world was starting to feel like a stranger. Every smile, every word of reassurance, now seemed like a carefully crafted act. She felt a deep sense of betrayal, but she wasn't ready to confront Mark just yet. Something told her to wait. She needed to understand more. She needed to know the truth. And so, with a heart full of uncertainty and a mind racing with fear, Samantha began to question everything she thought she knew about Mark, and about herself. The perfect relationship she had once believed in was starting to unravel, piece by piece, as the shadow of doubt crept closer. As the days passed, the sense of unease inside Samantha grew. The disease was slowly consuming her body, leaving her feeling weak and vulnerable, but it was Mark's behavior that started to chip away at her confidence. The small gestures of care that once seemed endearing now felt too deliberate, too calculated. Mark was still there, of course, tending to her every need. He brought her meals, stayed by her side during doctor visits, and even arranged for a nurse to come and assist when things became too overwhelming. But there was something in the way he looked at her now, an emotion she couldn't quite place, something that seemed colder, more distant. At times, when their eyes met, it wasn't the familiar warmth she had once known. Instead, it felt like he was studying her, as though calculating how much longer he had to wait before things could be finalized. It wasn't just the looks. It was the small, subtle things, the way he would avoid answering certain questions when it came to her treatment. Samantha would ask about her options for alternative therapies or the possibility of trying a new drug that could extend her life. Mark would brush off her inquiries with a gentle, "Don't worry about it, babe. We'll stick to the plan. We don't want to try anything too risky." Something about his insistence on sticking to a plan that she hadn't fully agreed on started to feel off. It was as if he wasn't just protecting her from the stress of decision-making, but controlling the narrative, her narrative. She began to feel like a spectator in her own life, watching as Mark made all the choices. It was his plan. His decisions. And she had little say in it. But it wasn't just his actions that were troubling her. Samantha started to notice his odd behavior whenever they discussed her life insurance policy. At first, it seemed innocent enough, just practical questions about the logistics of the policy. "We should make sure everything is in order," Mark would say. "Just so there are no hiccups, you know?" But as time went on, she noticed he would always pause when the topic came up, as if calculating his next words carefully. And then there were the late-night phone calls. Whenever Mark thought she wasn't paying attention, his phone would buzz, and he would pick it up quickly, stepping out of the room to talk in hushed tones. Samantha could hear the faint, low murmur of his voice, but she couldn't make out the words. There was no obvious reason for concern, but deep down, she felt like something was being kept from her. It was always the same, those phone calls, that strange hesitation whenever she asked about her insurance, the coldness that had replaced the warmth he used to give her. The discomfort she felt was subtle, yet undeniable. It was as if Mark were hiding something. One evening, as Samantha rested in bed, feeling the weight of her illness pressing down on her, she decided to act on the gnawing suspicion that had been growing inside her. She had always trusted Mark, never once doubting his intentions. But now, her instincts screamed that something wasn't right. She had to know the truth. Samantha had never been one to snoop. She wasn't the type to invade someone's privacy, especially not someone she loved. But desperate times called for desperate measures. Her life was at stake, and she wasn't going to sit back and let herself be manipulated. She needed answers. The next time Mark left the room to take one of his late-night calls, Samantha quietly slipped out of bed and made her way to his desk. She had never been a fan of snooping, but she knew that if she didn't take action now, she might never get the chance to uncover the truth. She carefully opened the drawer of his desk where he kept his phone, hoping that it would provide the answers she needed. There, she found a few things that made her heart race. There were papers scattered about, some she recognized, others she didn't. She glanced over the documents quickly, but one particular file caught her eye. It was an email thread between Mark and a representative from the insurance company. The subject line sent a chill down her spine: policy payout process, urgent. Samantha's hands trembled as she clicked on the email. The thread was dated only a few days ago. Mark had been communicating with the insurance company about the fastest way to claim the payout once she passed. Samantha's breath caught in her throat as she read the details. They weren't talking about treatment options or care plans. They were discussing a timetable, how soon after her death the payout could be processed, how to make sure there would be no delays. She felt a sharp, painful knot form in her stomach as the reality of the situation set in. In the thread, Mark had even mentioned a smooth transition, discussing the process as if it were a business transaction. He was making arrangements for his windfall, for his future without her. The room seemed to spin around Samantha as the weight of the discovery hit her. She had never imagined that Mark would betray her like this, that the man she had trusted with her heart and her life could be plotting to take it all away, literally. The questions that had been plaguing her mind for weeks now had answers, but they weren't the ones she'd hoped for. Mark wasn't just concerned about her well-being. He wasn't worried about losing her, the woman he claimed to love. No, he was waiting for her to die, he was counting the days. Samantha felt a surge of anger and betrayal that was almost too overwhelming to process. How could she have been so blind? How could she have been so trusting? But as the realization sank in, another thought emerged: what now? What could she do with this information? She had proof, but it wasn't enough yet. Mark was still playing the role of the devoted boyfriend, and she knew that if she confronted him now, he would deny everything. He would try to explain it away. He had to. This was his plan, his ticket to the payout he'd been waiting for. Samantha made a decision that night. She wasn't going to confront him yet. She needed more evidence, something concrete, something that would prove once and for all that Mark's love for her had never been real. She wasn't going to be a pawn in his game any longer. The days ahead would be difficult. She was sick, and time was running out. But she had made up her mind, she would find the truth, no matter what it took. Samantha knew she could no longer ignore the evidence she had uncovered. The truth was inescapable: Mark was playing a dangerous game, and she was the pawn. The thought of him betraying her in this way twisted her heart, but she couldn't afford to be consumed by emotion anymore. The time had come for her to take control of the situation, to ensure that Mark wouldn't walk away from this with a fortune and a life of comfort at her expense. Her next move was crucial. She needed more than just the damning emails and late-night phone calls. She needed something concrete, something undeniable that would expose Mark for what he truly was. Samantha had always prided herself on her intellect and resourcefulness. Now, more than ever, she needed to rely on her instincts. The first step was consulting an expert, someone who understood the intricacies of life insurance policies and fraud. She turned to Jason, an attorney who specialized in insurance law and fraud prevention. Jason came highly recommended by a colleague, and after a quick conversation, Samantha knew she could trust him. They met in a small, discreet cafe on the outskirts of the city, far from the prying eyes of Mark or anyone who might have been watching her. Samantha arrived early, her hands shaking from a mix of fear and anticipation. She sat at a corner booth, her back to the door, trying to steady her breathing. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes now. Jason arrived promptly, his expression serious as he sat across from her. His sharp, calculating eyes immediately assessed her demeanor, and after a brief exchange of pleasantries, they got down to business. "I've gathered everything you asked for," Samantha said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. She slid a folder across the table to him. "Emails, documents, text messages, everything I've found." Jason nodded, scanning the papers she handed over. His face remained impassive as he flipped through the pages, pausing on certain documents, particularly the email thread between Mark and the insurance company. He read it silently, then looked up at Samantha, his gaze piercing. "You're absolutely right," Jason said, his voice low and measured. "This is clear fraud. Mark is trying to expedite your death for the payout. It's manipulative, and it's criminal." Samantha felt a cold shiver run down her spine, but she forced herself to remain calm. "What do I do now? How can I stop this?" Jason leaned back in his chair, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. "First, you need to secure your position. I can help you contest the policy. We'll need to prove that Mark has been coercing you or attempting to hasten your death for financial gain. If we act fast enough, we might be able to freeze the payout, and possibly even have the policy voided. But how do we prove it?" Samantha asked, her mind racing. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, she was fighting for her future, for the justice that was owed to her. She couldn't let Mark get away with this. "Evidence," Jason said simply. "We'll need more than just your testimony. We need proof that Mark was plotting to claim the money prematurely. If we can show that he was making arrangements with the insurance company while you were still alive, it will solidify our case." Samantha nodded, determination settling in her chest. "I can get more evidence. I'll make him slip up. He thinks I'm weak, that I'm too sick to notice what he's doing. I'll prove him wrong." Jason smiled slightly, impressed by her resolve. "Good. But be careful. Mark will deny everything, and he'll likely try to manipulate the situation. We need to be 2 steps ahead of him." As Samantha and Jason discussed their next steps, she felt a newfound sense of clarity. She had been passive for so long, letting Mark make decisions for her, letting him control the narrative. But now, she was taking control of her life, of her future, even if it meant facing the most difficult challenge of her life. The next few days were filled with tension and careful planning. Samantha began to document everything she could. She started recording her conversations with Mark, pretending to be too weak to understand what was going on around her, all the while watching for any cracks in his calm exterior. It was hard, playing the role of the helpless patient while knowing the truth, but she had no choice. Mark couldn't suspect anything. She also began planting subtle traps, small clues that would lead him to believe that she was becoming more dependent on him, that she was no longer aware of what was going on behind the scenes. If he thought she was slipping away, he might make a move that would expose his intentions. Samantha knew Mark's patterns now. He was careful, but he was human, and humans always made mistakes. She was watching for those mistakes. One evening, a breakthrough came. Samantha overheard Mark talking on the phone again, stepping into the hallway outside their apartment. This time, she was prepared. She had set her phone to record the conversation, knowing that he would slip up sooner or later. The conversation was almost identical to the one she had found in the emails. Mark was discussing the insurance payout, making arrangements to ensure that everything was in order for when she passed. He even mentioned the specific amount of time they could expect before the funds would be released. Samantha's heart raced as she listened. This was it. This was the smoking gun she had been waiting for. Mark was making arrangements to secure the money, and in the process, he was showing his true colors. He was no longer the caring partner he had pretended to be. He was a cold, calculating individual who had been using her as nothing more than a stepping stone to his financial gain. When the conversation ended, Samantha immediately called Jason. Her voice was steady, but there was an underlying urgency in her tone. "I've got it. I've got the proof." Jason's voice was calm but firm. "Good. Now we move quickly. We need to file a claim with the insurance company and get a restraining order in place before he can do anything. This is our best shot." Samantha's pulse quickened as the weight of the situation settled in. The plan was in motion. She had everything she needed to bring Mark down and protect herself. But there was still one final obstacle: Mark. He wasn't going to give up easily. The battle for her life was just beginning. Samantha had no idea how far Mark would go to get what he wanted. But one thing was certain: she was done being his pawn. She was going to fight for her future, for justice, and for the life she deserved. No matter the cost. Samantha stood at the edge of a precipice, but for the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope. The evidence she had gathered, Mark's conversations with the insurance company, his secretive behavior, his cold, calculating demeanor, was damning. She had what she needed to expose him, to take back control of her life. But the path forward was fraught with danger. Mark wasn't going to go down easily. He had already proven himself willing to do anything for the payout, and Samantha couldn't afford to underestimate him now. The next step was critical. She had no illusions that Mark would simply confess or walk away quietly. If she was going to outsmart him, she needed to be strategic, patient, and, most importantly, careful. Jason, her attorney, had made it clear: they had one shot at this, and they needed to be 2 steps ahead of him. They met again at the cafe, the familiar meeting place where they had first started formulating their plan. This time, there was no need for pleasantries. Samantha came straight to the point. "I've got the evidence," she said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "It's time to take him down." Jason nodded, his expression serious. He had been reviewing the information she had collected, and he knew they were close, but they couldn't rush this. One wrong move, and Mark could slip through their fingers. "We need to play this smart," Jason said. "We'll start by filing a claim with the insurance company to freeze the payout. That'll buy us some time. Once we've done that, we need to make sure that Mark doesn't catch on. He'll likely start making moves to cover his tracks, so we need to act quickly." Samantha listened intently, absorbing every word. She was tired of playing the role of the victim. Tired of letting Mark pull the strings. It was time for her to take charge. "I'm ready," she said, her voice low but firm. "But how do we do it without him finding out?" Jason's eyes narrowed as he thought for a moment. "We'll need to set a trap, something that will make Mark think you're still under his control, that you're too weak to fight back. But behind the scenes, we'll be gathering the final pieces of evidence we need. We'll also need to make sure the insurance company knows exactly what's going on. If we don't act fast enough, Mark could try to make a play for the payout and walk away with everything." Samantha nodded, her mind already racing through the details. The trap would be delicate. She couldn't afford to let Mark catch wind of her plan before it was too late. She had to appear helpless, vulnerable, just as she had been doing all along, so that Mark wouldn't suspect anything. But at the same time, she couldn't let him outsmart her. She needed to be prepared to make the final move when the time was right. For the next few days, Samantha continued to play the role of the sick, weak patient. She let Mark take the lead, let him continue to make decisions for her, all the while knowing exactly what he was doing. She had become an expert at hiding her thoughts behind a mask of frailty. And Mark, never suspecting that she was aware of his plan, continued to act as though everything was proceeding according to his design. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Jason was working quickly to file the necessary paperwork to freeze the insurance payout. He also contacted the insurance company's legal department, alerting them to the possibility of fraud and manipulation. They had to act swiftly. If Mark managed to submit the claim before they could intervene, it would be too late. Samantha couldn't afford to wait. Then, just as Jason had predicted, Mark started to show signs of nervousness. He had grown more vigilant, more controlling in his interactions with her. He insisted on managing her medical care personally, limiting who could visit, and even discouraging her from asking too many questions about her treatment options. He had grown more obsessed with the timeline, with the details of the insurance payout. Samantha could see the panic in his eyes whenever she brought up the policy. He wanted to make sure that he would get his money, but he also knew that there were forces working against him. Forces he couldn't see. Samantha knew the moment had come. She had played the role of the helpless, trusting girlfriend for long enough. Now, it was time to turn the tables. The plan was simple: she would confront Mark when he least expected it. He thought he had her cornered, he thought he had manipulated her into submission. But Samantha had one more card to play. She had known from the beginning that Mark would eventually get sloppy, that his greed would push him to take risks. It was only a matter of time before he made the fatal mistake of underestimating her. The night before their scheduled confrontation, Samantha couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with possibilities, with the anxiety of what was to come. But amidst the swirling chaos of thoughts, one thing was clear: this was her moment. The moment when she would take back her power. The moment when she would make sure that Mark could never hurt her, or anyone else, again. The next day, as Mark sat beside her bed, his usual calm demeanor returning as he held her hand, Samantha pretended to be weak, as though she could barely hold herself together. She allowed him to lead the conversation, just as she had done for weeks. He spoke about their future, about what he would do with the money from the insurance policy once she was gone, about the life they could have together after her death. The words hit Samantha like a punch to the gut, but she forced herself to remain composed. She had prepared for this moment. She had rehearsed it in her mind 1,000 times. And now, it was finally time. "I know what you've been doing, Mark," she said, her voice soft, but steady. Mark's eyes widened, and for the first time in weeks, she saw a flicker of fear in his gaze. He quickly masked it with a smile, but the cracks were starting to show. What are you talking about, Sam?" His voice faltered, betraying him. "You think I don't know what you've been planning? The emails, the phone calls, the arrangements with the insurance company. You're not fooling me anymore." For a long moment, Mark said nothing. The silence hung heavy in the air, thick with tension. And then, slowly, as if realizing he was caught, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to hurt you, Sam. I needed the money. I didn't think it would come to this." Samantha's heart hardened as she looked him in the eye. "You were never in love with me, Mark. You were in love with the money. You were willing to let me die just so you could get your hands on it." Mark's face twisted with shame and anger, but Samantha didn't flinch. She had taken back her power. She had won. The days following the confrontation felt like a blur to Samantha. She had exposed Mark for what he truly was, a man driven by greed, ready to sacrifice everything, including her life, to secure his financial future. But the battle wasn't over. Far from it. She had won the first round, but Mark still had the upper hand in some ways. He had connections, he had influence, and he was desperate. Samantha knew she couldn't let her guard down for even a moment. The clock was ticking, and the stakes were higher than ever. Samantha's health continued to deteriorate. Each passing day felt like a heavy weight pressing down on her chest, as the cancer slowly consumed her body. But despite the pain, despite the overwhelming sense of exhaustion, she was determined to see this through. She had fought for too long to let Mark walk away with his ill-gotten gain. She would not be a victim. Not now. Not ever. Jason, her attorney, had been working tirelessly behind the scenes, gathering the necessary legal paperwork to freeze the insurance payout and stop Mark from making any further moves. But even with all their preparation, Samantha knew they had to act fast. Mark was likely starting to panic. The longer they waited, the more likely he would do something drastic to cover his tracks, maybe even something far worse than what he had already planned. That night, as Samantha lay in her bed, she could hear Mark moving quietly through the apartment. She could feel his presence in the room, even though he wasn't speaking. His footsteps were careful, deliberate. He was on edge. Samantha knew that after the confrontation, he would do everything in his power to salvage the situation. He wouldn't let her ruin his plans. She turned to Jason's advice. Keep him close, he had told her. Keep him believing you're still too weak to act. Let him make the first move. We need him to make a mistake. It wasn't easy. The lies, the manipulation, the constant pretending, it drained Samantha's spirit. But she kept her resolve. She had one final play to make, and it would come when Mark least expected it. Samantha's opportunity came sooner than she had expected. Mark, in a moment of desperation, made a move that would seal his fate. It happened the following afternoon, just a day after their confrontation. Mark had become more agitated than usual, his demeanor no longer calm but frantic. He was pacing around the living room, speaking on the phone in low, hurried tones. Samantha could hear fragments of the conversation through the thin walls, something about getting the paperwork ready and not letting anything slip through the cracks. She took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She slipped out of her bed, moving quietly toward the living room where Mark was, her heart pounding with both fear and anticipation. She had one chance to expose him completely. With slow, deliberate steps, she entered the living room. Mark didn't notice her at first, his back turned as he focused on his phone call. This was it, the perfect moment. She knew she had to act quickly. Mark, Samantha's voice cut through the silence. It was calm, controlled, but it carried the weight of everything she had been holding back for so long. Mark jumped, his body stiffening in shock. He turned around, quickly trying to mask the panic in his eyes. Samantha. I didn't hear you come in, he stammered, his voice strained. She studied him carefully. His eyes darted toward the phone, but then he quickly hung up, as if trying to erase any trace of the conversation. He attempted to force a smile, but it was hollow. I just thought I'd check on you, make sure you're okay, he said, the words empty, just a performance now. Samantha crossed the room, standing in front of him. The silence between them was thick, pregnant with all the unspoken truths that had been lingering for far too long. I know what you're planning, Mark, she said, her voice unwavering. Mark's eyes flickered with fear for just a moment before he composed himself. What do you mean? He asked, his voice too smooth, too rehearsed. You think I don't know about the insurance claim? You think I'm too weak to fight back, too sick to see what's happening? I know about your calls, your plans, your little schemes. You were never interested in me, Mark. You were interested in the money. You've been planning my death from the very beginning. And I'm not going to let you get away with it. Mark's face paled. He took a step back, as if the words were physical blows. For the first time, the facade cracked. He was no longer the charming, caring boyfriend. He was the manipulator, the fraud. I didn't want it to go this far, Samantha. Mark's voice was shaky now, his usual confidence completely gone. I thought I could make it work. You were never supposed to find out. I just wanted the money. I didn't want you to suffer. Samantha shook her head, her eyes never leaving his. But you were willing to make me suffer. You were willing to kill me for it. And that, Mark, is something I can't forgive. He stepped back again, as if the weight of her words was too much to bear. I didn't think you'd ever find out. I thought you'd die before this all came to light. The reality of his betrayal hit her like a tidal wave. But instead of succumbing to the devastation, Samantha felt a strange calm. The battle had been long and painful, but now she had the upper hand. I'm not just going to sit here and let you get away with it. I've already contacted the insurance company. The payout is frozen. It won't be going to you. You've been caught, Mark. The fear in his eyes was palpable now. Mark knew he was done. He had underestimated Samantha. He thought he could play her like a puppet, but she had been pulling the strings all along. As Mark started to stammer, desperately trying to salvage the situation, Samantha's phone rang. It was Jason. "Stay calm," he said when she answered. "We've got him. The insurance company has already initiated the investigation. Mark's done." The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read. Samantha sat in the front row, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Mark, the man who had once promised to be her partner in life, now stood with his head hung low. The judge's voice echoed through the room, each word a blow to the false narrative Mark had built. "Guilty of insurance fraud, manipulation, and attempted murder," the judge declared. Samantha felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. It wasn't the kind of victory she had imagined when this all began. The pain of her diagnosis still lingered, and the memory of Mark's betrayal would always be a part of her story. But the weight of the world had been lifted from her shoulders. She had fought for her life, for her dignity, and for justice, and she had won. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as the gavel struck. Mark was led away in handcuffs, his expression twisted with shame and defeat. Samantha watched him go, but there was no satisfaction in her gaze, no sense of triumph. Instead, there was a quiet finality, the end of a chapter in her life she would never forget but could now finally move past. A few weeks later, Samantha sat in her apartment, the soft hum of the city below her. The diagnosis still weighed heavily on her, but she had found a new sense of purpose. She had spent the time since the trial speaking with her attorney, Jason, and the insurance company, making sure that everything had been finalized. Mark's manipulations had been exposed, and the insurance payout, which would have gone to him, was now being redirected to the charity she had set up years ago, a cause near and dear to her heart. Samantha had always dreamed of helping others, especially those who were suffering from terminal illnesses and could not afford the proper care. Now, with the money that would have gone to Mark, she could fulfill that dream. She had made sure the money was used in a way that would honor her legacy, even if she didn't have much time left to enjoy it herself. Jason called her one afternoon to let her know that everything was in place. "You've done good, Sam. We've got all the paperwork finalized, and the charity is set to receive the funds as soon as possible. It's all over now. Mark's gone, and you're free." Samantha smiled softly, her voice steady. "I never thought I'd get to this point, but here we are. It's strange, isn't it? How much control we think we have, only to realize that sometimes, we just need to let go." Jason chuckled lightly on the other end of the line. "You've always been a fighter, Sam. But now, you're fighting for something bigger than yourself. You've taken control of your life, your future, and you're making sure that the people who need help the most get it." She let his words sink in. He was right. She hadn't just fought for herself. She had fought for something that mattered, something that would outlast her, something that would make a difference in the lives of others who were struggling with the same things she had faced. As the days passed, Samantha felt the weight of her illness growing heavier. But in the quiet moments, she found solace. Her battle with cancer wasn't over, but it had become a part of her journey, not the end of it. The betrayal she had endured, the deceit, the lies, those were all behind her now. What remained was her legacy. The work she had done to help others would live on, long after she was gone. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of pink and orange, Samantha sat in the small park near her apartment, a place she had visited many times during her treatment. The air was cool, a breeze rustling the leaves above her. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the quiet wash over her, and thought about everything she had been through. It had been a long road. She had faced the darkest of moments, when it felt like the world was closing in on her. But through it all, she had found the strength to rise, to fight for herself, and to expose the truth. And now, in the final days of her life, she was at peace. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Jason. "I just wanted to check in. Everything's good. You're making a real difference, Sam. I'm proud of you." A smile tugged at the corners of her lips as she read the message. She replied simply, "Thank you." It wasn't just gratitude she felt in that moment. It was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had done the right thing. She had fought back against the injustice of her situation, and though the outcome wasn't what she had expected when she first received her diagnosis, it was something much greater. She had reclaimed her power. She had taken back control of her life. And in doing so, she had ensured that her story wouldn't just end with her. As the wind rustled the trees, Samantha leaned back against the bench, her eyes drifting to the horizon. She had no idea what the future held for her, but for the first time in a long time, she was okay with that. The fight had been long, and the scars would remain. But she had won. She had lived her truth, and she had made sure that the world would know it. Her journey was far from over, but Samantha knew one thing for certain: no matter what happened next, she had found her redemption. And in that, she had found peace.